Alright, I know it's been a while, but we had a lot happen this year. In March of this year, longtime friend of the channel and IRL friend of mine, Mercenary Cobra 1, passed away. It was an event that caught, frankly, all of us by surprise. It still feels a bit unreal, to be perfectly honest. I had to go to many of the communities that he was affiliated with in order to bring the bad news, and this was rough. My channel essentially only exists because of Cobra 1. This replay of Snake's Revenge essentially is only happening because of Cobra 1. And you know what? He's exactly the person who would ask me to continue this. And so I am. And good God, do I have a lot I want to talk about in this episode. So with that in mind, welcome! This is Jamis, and you're watching episode 5 of my replay of Snake's Revenge. This episode is going to focus on the tram stations, which are a series of outposts that lead right up to the main base. The traps and enemies are more insidious than ever and cause more problems than they ever have before. But we get some great items here, not the least of which being one from Metal Gear 1, the infrared goggles. And while their purpose more or less is the same, detecting infrared lasers that trip alarms, they actually have significantly more functionality in Snake's Revenge than they ever did in Metal Gear. When equipped, they expose the lasers, yeah, but they also make it so that the entire background is monochrome, which makes the enemy sprites stand out much more vividly. It's a nice little way to give the goggles a tiny bit more utility than they'd otherwise have, since I'm pretty sure you only encounter the sensors around the tram stations. One really interesting thing that most people don't know about Snake's Revenge is how they made the music for it. One thing you'll notice if you listen to Snake's Revenge's soundtrack at high quality is that it has these drum sections that go incredibly hard, but they don't sound like the normal NES sound chip. It's kind of hard to believe now, but there was a point where Konami was a legitimate innovator. So what Konami started doing around the time Snake's Revenge launched was something called sampling. What they do is record an actual instrument playing a note. They needed to keep the file size down at all costs, so the file would be very bit crushed, but also very short, a fraction of a second. The result would be a tiny little audio file that, when they're playing music, they would then pitch bend and tone shift. So every time you're hearing that really hard drum beat in Snake's Revenge, it's because they're using that one sample. We are currently riding one of the tram lines right now. Falling off is instant death, so don't do it either on the overhead map or in the side-scrolling area. During the side-scrolling area, you should make a beeline to the left side of the tram and hug the side. Each of the trams has a guard that's stationed as a lookout. If he spots you, he will not only climb up to engage you and probably fall off and die, but he will sound the alarms and you'll come under attack from the jetpack troopers from Metal Gear 1. While that is a nice little Easter egg, it's also very annoying, so we are not going to do that if we can help it. Actually, if there's one thing I can give Snake's Revenge, it's that its soundtrack is awesome. Seriously, it's great. All killer, no filler. I'd say the only song that's even remotely lacking is the interstitial music that plays at the train yard and the port. But all the other songs? Great. Jungle Infiltration, Building Infiltration, Escape Music 1 and 2, the train music, the tunnel theme, and of course the final area theme, as well as the compound music. All of it's great. Even the intro and ending credits music is really good. Hell, I even like the alert and boss themes. All of which drives home that the biggest issues I have with Snake's Revenge are the wild difficulty swings, a few questionable design decisions, and the fact that absolutely nothing is explained. With a little bit of tweaking, this game would go from simply good to significantly better than the original Metal Gear. And it's actually because of that I feel that Kojima stepped up to the plate with Metal Gear 2. Because as I discussed earlier, there's a shocking amount of common ground between the two games. An interesting quirk about the level design in this area is that because of the unpredictability of the guards, the submachine gun and claymore become much more valuable here. I am going to be spending almost my entire claymore stockpile here, and with good reason. Almost none of the enemies in the final area are vulnerable to it, and the danger in the final couple of areas stems mostly from traps and the errant encounter with hit squads, not from the guards themselves. Moving forward, we have one of the last officers we'll be able to interrogate for quite a while, who gives us the information that Metal Gear 2 is roughly 7 times more powerful than Metal Gear 1. Up ahead, we will be securing 2 more additional items in order to enable our progression. The first is Keycard 6, which, among other things, is necessary for opening the Final Fortress's main door. The other item is the antidote. In Metal Gear 1, the antidote was used to cure poison should you happen to run into a scorpion in the desert area. The antidote in Metal Gear 1 had infinite uses. In Snake's Revenge, it's a consumable. The poison isn't as immediately lethal in Snake's Revenge as it was in the original Metal Gear, but it will still kill you through the damage over time effect if you're not careful, and antidote's the only way to cure it. Poison in this game, however, is specifically inflicted by injector traps. So we will be banking them up now in order to never have to worry about this problem again later. Now here's an interesting little side tangent that was brought to me by my friend Coffee. One problem that Metal Gear purists have with the NES and Famicom versions of Metal Gear is that several of the bosses, most notably the Hind D and the Metal Gear tank at the end of the game, are missing. They've been changed. The Hind D boss on Building 1's roof has been replaced by the Twin Gunners boss, whereas the Metal Gear tank has been replaced with the Master Computer, which you effectively destroy to stop it from being able to target and launch its nuclear missiles. However, I'm going to play devil's advocate with these two bosses, for a few reasons. First of all, most of the bosses in Metal Gear aren't bosses, they're skill challenges. Both the Shotgunner and the Machine Gun Kid can be taken out without taking a hit if you have remote control missiles. The Hind D is a stationary turret of a boss that does nothing but shoot at you while remaining perfectly stationary, and you drop grenades onto it. The Metal Gear tank itself in the MSX version of Metal Gear literally does nothing but stand there and get protected by a pair of laser cameras. By them being removed, you're not really missing anything. If anything, the TX-55 being the unfought only added to its mystique back in the day. If you're wondering why these bosses were changed, however, well, that award goes to hardware restrictions. See, on the Famicom and NES, sprites are divided up into 16 pixel by 16 pixel tiles. If you want particularly big sprites, you gotta use a bunch of them and then fit them together like a puzzle. For most sprites, even fairly big ones, this is no big deal. But for the Hind D and the TX-55, both of them are represented by gigantic sprites, with both sprites taking up almost a third of the screen's real estate. However, before I can continue, I need to take a momentary break in order to show you something. Namely, from the tram stations onward, your comm system is completely jammed until you can find the antenna. The antenna will let you break through the jamming and access the transceiver again. To the best of my knowledge, you cannot beat the game without the antenna. Anyway, back to the subject I was talking about. Because of just how big these sprites were, they took up an enormous amount of real estate and memory, in a version of a game where they are already trying to slash and burn in order to make sure that the game even works correctly. Now, Snake's Revenge, if you noticed, doesn't have this problem. In particular, the Huey that drops you off at the start of the game and picks you up on the ship chapter is huge. It's also animated, unlike the Hind D. By that point in development, Konami developed entirely new protocols for how to do big sprites like this. For example, a lot of what they had to do in the 90s was porting arcade titles, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which became Turtles 2 on NES. This is something that necessitated that Konami learn how to make big sprites that are animated happen. And those of us who are familiar with Konami as it exists now tend to kind of forget the fact that it used to be a major innovator. Nowadays they do a lot of subcontracting, which is sad, but at least they're making quality titles again. Konami not only putting out a Silent Hill 2 remake, but having that remake be actually quality, courtesy of a company that actually knows what they're doing, is not really something I ever thought I'd see. Especially after the nonsense involved with the studio that created both Homecoming and Book of Memories. However, Bloober Team, the team behind Layers of Fear, which I did not consider a good game, just shows up and with complete aplomb manages to stick the landing. It doesn't try to replace the original, it shows nothing but respect for it while also being its own thing. It's actually pretty clever, and certainly not something I ever expected to see, but I am very glad to. God, I would do unspeakable things to get Snake's Revenge a remake. I know it's not going to get one, it's considered alt-canon and thus tainted with the inevitable brush of that, but we have non-canon Castlevania games that get remakes and re-releases, like Circle of the Moon. And considering its importance of place within Metal Gear history, I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more of it. You'll note that the door that we passed when we first descended the elevator into this particular area didn't open with any of the keycards we have. That's because it's a one-way door. Both Metal Gear and Snake's Revenge have a few of these. That's one of the more famous ones. Once you reach the room with the antenna in it, an item, again, you need in order to beat the game, you can directly use that shortcut to get right back to the elevator. It's interesting because the tram stations are pretty much a straight shot. Stop at each one, clear it out, get the items you need, and move on. Once you have them all, you just ride the tram to the final station at the end of the line, and you are at the enemy fortress. I actually made a whole little flowchart that shows the progression in Snake's Revenge. Obviously, the stops are not remotely to scale, but it does give you a general idea of just how big the game is. Each set piece in Snake's Revenge feels and looks different. And while this does kind of make it the Metroid fusion to the original Metal Gear Super Metroid, it does have the benefit of seriously cutting down on backtracking. I feel like there's genuine potential within this format, which might be why Unmetal, of all games, wound up using the same format. We're actually almost done with this particular area, which I admit probably seems a little bit strange, but the 3 individual buildings that represent the tram stations are a straight shot directly to the objective. So as long as you interrogate the officer, save the hostage, and get all the items, you're pretty much golden. Which, by the way, if you're wondering about that one door in the northeastern corner of the first building that I completely ignored, the only thing in there is truth gas. Because we maxed out our truth gas earlier, we never needed to stop there. In fact, I'm pretty sure we never need to restock for the rest of the game. Once again, I find myself a little bummed out that the transceiver just sees so little use that even in the gigantic section where you don't have it, you barely notice its absence. We finally get the antenna now so we can use it again. But again, so much opportunity is just taken and not used. Even with prototypes of the Famicom version of Snake's Revenge slipping onto the internet at some point, we barely know a lot of this game's development history or what went into it. I feel like pointing out that a giant wasted opportunity is that nothing is done with Snake's support team. Nick has been more or less absent the entire game. Yes, it makes sense he is doing stuff in the background, but we never actually see him at all until damn near the end of the game. John, you never see or hear from again. Jennifer, you don't even see at all until after the final boss. Other than Snake, the support character with the most screen time is Charlie, the helicopter pilot. Because at least you see him every time you use a password. All of that is stuff that Snake's Revenge absolutely deserves criticism over. However, I will continue to contend until my dying breath that the good in Snake's Revenge grossly outclasses the bad. Well, it's the worst Metal Gear game, Jameis. To which I reply, you sure about that? You really sure about that? You really, really sure about that? Snake's Revenge's cardinal sin is wearing the bra of a considerably better endowed game. And its place in Metal Gear history, well, less than glamorous, is pretty much the reason the franchise still exists now. If Snake's Revenge didn't exist, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake wouldn't exist. The MSX version of Metal Gear was mostly seen as a commercial failure. It was the Famicom and NES ports that actually got interest going. The Snake's Revenge team, having met with Kojima, is what led to Kojima creating Metal Gear 2. And Metal Gear 2 is what gave us the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Anyway, we've retreaded enough ground for one day. We are finally at the enemy base, and hopefully I will be able to crank out the next episode in this series sooner rather than later. I'm sorry it took so long.